France has approved a new law requiring people to have special coronavirus passes to go to restaurants and other public venues. After hours of debate, lawmakers voted to pass the bill by a large majority. The health passes will also be needed for domestic travel and, most controversially, vaccinations are now compulsory for all healthcare workers. Clashes broke out in Paris over the measures during the weekend. France has seen a recent spike in coronavirus cases and hospital admissions. Germany is considering similar measures as infection rates are again on the rise. Experts and politicians hope to avoid another lockdown through mass vaccination. But should those who refuse to get inoculated face restrictions, or would that essentially mean that vaccines become mandatory? The debate is intensifying, especially among those campaigning for Germany's upcoming general elections. DW's political correspondent Theresa Tropper is following this story for us. Good morning, Theresa. What do German people think of this debate?
Well, Germans are divided, Sumi, in this case, in those that are vaccinated and those that are not. As we've heard, around 60% of Germans have had one jab and 50% are fully vaccinated already. So that means that's a majority, but it also means that around 40% of Germans have not had a jab at all, even though most of them at least could have now that vaccines are widely available. And now the debate is whether the majority that's vaccinated should face new restrictions in autumn to protect the minority that has decided not to be vaccinated for personal reasons. Now, the one thing Germans agree on at the moment is the fact that vaccinations should not become mandatory, but that means incentives are needed now to convince Germans who have not decided to get the jab and to boost the vaccination campaign, which has slowed down in recent weeks. And for that, of course, giving freedoms to people who have had both necessary jabs is an option that might convince at least some people to get a jab.
Well, Germans are going to the polls in September. How decisive could the handling of this debate and the coronavirus be in this election?
Well, that very much depends on how things develop over the coming weeks, because at the moment, other topics like the severe flood we saw in Western Germany or climate change seem more pressing to many Germans. But that might change because, as we've heard, case numbers are rising. So far, we haven't seen the hospitalization rates go up or the death rates. But if experts are right and case numbers reach 100,000 per day by the time Germans head to the polls, of course, the topic is going to be an important one, because if hospitals fill up, if schools have to close down, or if even another lockdown is imposed, then many Germans might base their decision at the ballot box on whether they think that the parties in charge have done everything to protect them against the coronavirus they could or not.
DW's Theresa Tropper reporting for us. Good to talk to you. Now, after welcoming back tourists, Greece is now also battling a surge in new infections. Tourism is vital to the economy, and Greece faces the challenge of fighting the virus while luring tourists back to the beaches. After the worst year on record, the country can hardly afford to lose another summer. On the party island of Mykonos, authorities have imposed a curfew to try and contain the virus. 1 week after most lockdown restrictions were lifted across England, businesses are now facing a different roadblock. As COVID-19 case numbers remain high, more and more people are being pinged as close contacts by the national case tracking app. That has led to hundreds of thousands of employees being required to isolate for 10 days. Many businesses are facing staff shortages and closures as a result. It's estimated that what's being called the Pingdemic will cost the UK economy billions. Let's get the latest on this story from London. DW's Charlotte Shelsom-Pill is standing by for us there. Hi, Charlotte. You know, we've talked about the problems there that the Pingdemic is causing, but infection rates that have been high over the past few weeks are currently dropping. Is that enough to ease the situation?
Suma, that's right. Case numbers have now dropped 5 days in a row. That's the first time since the start of the pandemic that that's happened without any lockdown restrictions in place. Now, of course, as case numbers drop, that will have a knock-on effect on the number of people who are being pinged, shall we say, who are being asked to isolate after coming into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. The last figures that were released said over 600,000 people in England and Wales were being told to isolate. That is having a huge impact on businesses here. Last week, newspapers splashed front pages of shop shelves being empty. The government hopes that it has now addressed that issue. It has said some critical workers, particularly those who work in the food industry, in food distribution, will be exempt from the isolation advice, provided that they test positive, test negative rather, day on day. But clearly this is having case numbers when they're so high. It's going to have a huge effect on people, on industries, when people are being told to isolate.
Yeah, tell us more about how this rule has been affecting everyday life in the UK.
Well, as I said there, food shelves were shown to be empty last week. Of course, it wasn't widespread, but there were incidences of it, some restaurants being forced to close as well, all down to that correlation between the higher case numbers that the UK has been seeing and people then being told to isolate. Now, it has to be made clear that those who are asked to isolate because of an app where they are shown to come into contact with people, that's not legally obligated that they isolate. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of people who don't want to be affected by this are simply either deleting the app or turning off their Bluetooth. So what you might see over the coming weeks is a reduction in those isolation numbers as more and more people simply have had enough and don't want to be pinged, as it's called here.
And are there discussions taking place there about a different approach, perhaps?
There is a different approach already planned. The government says that it expects, as of the middle of August, anybody who has been double vaccinated will no longer have to isolate if they have been pinged. And vaccination numbers are extremely high here. Over 70% of people already across the UK, of adults, have already been double vaccinated. So new regulations are expected to come into place to ease the number of people being told to isolate. But industry leaders are warning that is going to be too late. They're calling for that date to be brought forward.
DW's Charlotte Shelson-Pill reporting from London. Thank you.